What?
Was that fine?
No.
I don't know.
Do it again.
Most of us spend a quarter of our lives in the place we call school. And the more time we spend there, the more we complain.
It's no secret that the schooling system in America has flaws. So, join us once a month as we take a look at the ins and outs of American schooling to find the bad and the good.
Let's get started then. I'm Amar.
I'm Matthew.
And this is Our Side of the Coin, Season 2. Hey, welcome to Season 2 on Our Side of the Coin. This season, we're changing things up just a little bit. We're going to be talking about everything wrong with the American public school system. Today, we're going to be talking about whether or not school should actually be mandatory or not. Matthew, go ahead, get us started.
Yeah, so school is the only thing that me and Amar know about, apparently. So we decided that it would be something we could actually go about in depth. And so the first episode we're going to do, we thought it would be a good idea to start off talking about, because I think it's kind of taken for granted, that you do school. It's just every kid, the first quarter of their life is spent in a classroom. So I kind of wanted to talk about that. And so legally in the United States, you have to do school until you are 16. And once you're 16, then you legally have the option to try to stop doing school. And I think Amar has opinions about that.
Yeah, so here's what I'm going to start off with. First of all, this isn't just we're not just talking about the age at whether or not you should be able to drop out. We're going to be talking about different subjects within school, how long those should go for as well. What school should actually be teaching. Why are we going to school in the first place, right? And so like Matt said, most of the US, you are able to drop out once you are 16. Now, the question is, we'll start with whether you should be able to drop out at 16. And personally, I'm going to have to say no there. I'm going to bring up a little fact here. Basically, and I think it's a pretty well-known fact, but most people know that the teenage brain is still underdeveloped until you're the time from about 24, 25, and that's a study from Duke University if you want to look it up. And so it's kind of hard, and I know it's weird the way society pushes this, right? Because all of a sudden when you're 18, now you have to make huge life-changing decisions. Where do you want to go to college? What do you want to do as a career? Whether you should take out a couple $100,000 of loans to get a college education, et cetera, right? But I do think dropping out at 16 is often more the response of an emotional action than it is a logical decision, which is why I'm going to argue that legally that should probably be pushed up to 18 along with, all the other decisions that we make at that time.
I would disagree with that it's wholly an emotional sort of thing, because I would agree if you can, staying in school all the way through is a good idea and you should do that. But sometimes it's not necessarily you decide to drop out, but more so you have to drop out. One big thing for that might be financial reasons. If you find yourself in the situation where you have to be the breadwinner, sometimes you are forced in a decision where you have to try to support yourself early, which is really which is bad and not ideal. But I think that is just what happens sometimes. And so to have to be burdened with doing that and school at the same time.
What you just said there is more of an extenuating circumstance. Honestly, a lot of people that you hear who drop out of high school often don't have that, rut in the road. If they do, that is totally understandable, right? But if you look at it from that perspective as well, what you've essentially created is this cyclical nature of poverty in that way, right? What happens is the parents lose the ability to financially support their family. All of a sudden, the responsibility is then placed on the child. The child is unable to complete their education, is unable to get a satisfactory job, and is literally working paycheck to paycheck, maybe for it's an unknown amount of years, right? And essentially, and then if they have kids, guess what? The cycle continues to repeat. So the reason I bring that up is because extenuating circumstances like that, it's understandable, and alternatives aren't great either. Obviously, you don't want anybody to starve. You need a house to live in, right? But if you supply, and this may be where more government policy comes in, supports. They've done great things recently with allowing free lunches at a lot of public high schools throughout the U.S. and, offering breakfast programs, et cetera. Just doing whatever you can to support your students from the government to keep those students in. Now, the problem is a lot of these dropouts are dropping out. Sometimes it's academic failure as well, right? I say if people will give up pretty fast if they feel, I failed one or two classes. I probably shouldn't even get a high school degree. It's not going to do anything for me anyway. Or I'm not going to be able to get a high school degree in the time that I want and immediately drop out at 16. Going back to what we were talking about with the emotional response thing, this is a bit of psychology and neurology, but the reason I bring up the underdeveloped teenage brain is we have two main factors in decision making when we're thinking about a problem, right? For most rational adults, you use what the frontal lobe of your brain. That's commonly, and it's obviously everything is wired throughout because your brain is totally connected. But your frontal lobe is essentially underdeveloped until you're 24, 25, essentially limiting, your actual ability to think rationally, often because your amygdala, develops before your frontal lobe is fully developed. You often essentially put more emotion into your thought process than you otherwise think you would be doing.
Okay. So you're saying, like, people make the decision too early? Like before, like, people are making the decision against their own judgment?
Yeah, and I mean, I understand with what you were saying with extenuating circumstance. Like I said, stuff happens, but I think that's where if we were to hypothetically make a law that says, okay, you're not allowed to drop out until you're 18 years old, right? Mm. If that were to be placed, the government should also provide supplemental policies to prevent these sort of extenuating circumstances from impacting somebody's education. It's not really fair to somebody if they're born into this poverty cycle, right? And then they try to break out of it by seeking better education and are unable to despite their best efforts because of financial factors that could have definitely been easily avoided.
So I think we're in agreement that doing like a full K through 12 experience, if you can, is what you should try to do. But I don't think all of the parts of the high school experience are entirely necessary. And we've actually already talked about this before. So one thing people talk about a lot is math in high school. And you always hear, like, when am I ever going to do this? Like, especially, like, the later years, 11 to 12. Like, when am I ever going to use this in the real life? I shouldn't have to learn this. So what do you think about the proposition that math should be optional after 10th grade?
So, this is a bit of an interesting, and I know we talked about this in season 1 just a little bit. Math is one of those, like, tricky subjects, right? Because also everybody's at a different level at different times throughout high school. So if we were assuming a standard curve with geometry being taken in 9th grade, algebra 1 being taken in 10th grade, pre-calc in 11th, and calc in 12th, right? Let's just assume that curve. So essentially you would finish algebra 2 and not have to worry about calculus, correct?
Yeah, I suppose, yeah.
Yeah. The problem is a lot of times, and I guess this kind of goes back to what we were talking about with an underdeveloped, frontal lobe cortex, is we often feel that we might be bad at something at a time, and given, like, circumstances, you may be seeing other people around you be doing extremely well in math. You may be in a situation where, you've never liked math to begin with, right? A lot of times, though, you don't know what you're planning to do. And I mean, some people do, but you might have this period where you don't know what you want to do. You don't like math, so you just completely get rid of math. And then a couple of years down the line, you're in college and you realize, oh, wait, I kind of like this engineering thing. And all of a sudden, now you're 2 years behind in math from all your engineering counterparts. My answer isn't very clear here. I can't give you a yes, math should be optional, or no, math shouldn't be optional here exactly. I think what instead should happen is there should be a broader change of the system as a whole to indicate towards, aligning people's courses with their career choices earlier than currently is.
So your argument makes sense, but I'm actually not entirely convinced because, as it turns out, me and Amar are now college students. And so I actually have experience a little bit about what college is like. And the thing I noticed is they teach you math in college. And at least in my experience, I found it to be a little bit redundant compared to what we learned in high school. So I think there's like a system you can design where when you leave off in 10th grade, you have enough math. So as when the scenario happens that you said where you realize, oh, I do actually want to do like a STEM/engineering thing, and I haven't done math in 2 years, at least, like, ideally, you can make a system where in 10th grade you have enough skills where you can jump back into math in college at this, like, because you have to do prereqs anyway. So instead of having the prereqs be entirely useless, you can at least learn something.
Yeah, and I mean, I get that, and that's why I said I couldn't give you a clear yes or no answer on math should or shouldn't be optional, right? The only thing I say about that is what I talked about with the inequality amongst, people pursuing a similar degree. It's just not in your best interest to usually. And so maybe what should happen here is that high school should recommend people take math and, like, push it if they can, but mandatory, if somebody knows they're going to go to a vocational school or art school or something of the likes, right? And they know they're probably not going to need calculus for their occupation, or even, in general for their prerequisites in college for whatever major they may be doing, correct? Mm-hmm. And that's where I would think it should be optional, but you should know the risks that you're taking when you decide, okay, I don't want to take math anymore.
So I guess that's math. Another thing, though, which may seem a bit extraneous in the high school, is the art category. So at our high school, we were offered 3 arts. We were offered visual arts, band, and choir. And the way it was set up, you had to do one of those 3 for at least 2 years. And that's what actually I really like that is available as an option, because I know in other countries it's not as accessible, and I think that's really good. But I think at that point you'll know whether you are interested in that kind of thing, because to be honest, art is entirely interest based, and I don't really see the point in forcing people to do it if you don't have an interest in it.
Yeah, honestly, I'm going to agree with you there for the most part. The only thing is, drawing from experience, right, is that I never was very good at any of these 3. I've always been a math science guy, right? Give me the hard facts and numbers and I'll give you what you need. I took 2 years of visual arts in high school as required, and I was never good at it the entire time. What I did find interesting was, however, was just the concept, the way your brain works, right? And I know I keep bringing up quite a bit of neurology in this. I don't know why I have the theme of neurology today.
He's going to pre-med. Can you tell?
So you have this, there's a theory known as synaptogenesis, which essentially is your brain throughout your entire life will continue to form new connections between neurons based on learning patterns that you do. And certain patterns allow for translation of one skill into another aspect of your life, right? So the only reason I bring this up is because I agree with you. I think art, band, choir should all be totally optional after middle school, right? And I think middle school gives you a sufficient base. And 100%, I do think these are important to keep in high schools. I know what you're saying with a lot of other countries don't have the funding or the infrastructure to allocate resources to these sort of art programs within high schools, right? And I think it's a very good thing that for the large majority of the U.S., especially in city areas, we can afford to give students the opportunities to, pursue their interests as an actual career, which is another big problem, which we'll talk about another time. I only want to keep in mind that some of these skills are important early on to form new pathways in your brain, and so that you're not left behind if you wish to switch to one of these vocational careers later in life.
That makes sense, and I would agree. But just as a clarification, I think that art should be required early school, elementary, middle school. I'm just saying once you get to high school, I think you will know by then whether you're interested. I think by then you will have done, maybe to some extent done the thing you said where you'll have enough experience with the creative process or whatever that it'll have transferable skills. And I do agree with that point.
All right, moving on. So Matt, and this was a great point. We know that schools don't really teach what is sort of important to you often get to complain for students that walk out of high school. Great, I have this diploma. How do I do taxes? How do I fix my car? How do I XYZ? How do I live my life as a functioning adult, right? And this is sort of a problem considering that school is the basis. You could call it the tutorial to life, right? School is supposed to serve as as a sort of tutorial as to, okay, this is how I will become a responsible, functioning human adult later. And instead, what we're given is all we're essentially taught is work hard and you'll be good, right?
Tutorial to college.
Tutorial to college, exactly, right? So run me through some of these ideas that you got. What do you think schools should include in addition to their curriculum without overburdening the student, I think?
So, the main big one you hear is the one you brought up with the taxes thing. Because I know at least our school had it a little bit. I think it could be a lot more, though. Just teaching personal finance. Because in the society we live in, say about it what you will, money is very important. And I feel like people aren't very good at money. I have no idea how anything works. So I would for example, how insurance works. Because in the U.S., it's pretty complicated. How do loans work? How does banking work? Because money's kind of complicated if you don't know where to start. So I think school could be a place to do that. And that's not an original argument either, but I think it's not a bad idea. And then the second thing I put here is time management skills. And lots of people will argue that schools do actually do that. Especially our school did explicitly try, but I think it could be like a bit more practical minded, I guess. It seemed to be very much how to manage your time so that you have enough time to study for tests, as opposed to be able to do things you want to do. So yeah, I think that the time management could be like a little more direct.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I don't know what argument we were going for, because I basically agree with what you said. I mean, in a way, because you have all these academic pressure, similar to like the sort of career pressure that you might face, you will essentially somehow figure out how to manage your time. Whether that is healthy or unhealthily, you will somehow figure out how to squeeze everything in, knowing the consequences if you fail, right? Now, the stress that places is a whole nother topic. But, yeah, essentially, I agree with you there. I don't think schools teach the proper life skills that are necessary. I do think being in the school environment is very important to learn all sorts of interpersonal, intrapersonal, how you learn, academic, most skills that you can learn while being around people. And, academically, obviously school's going to be very focused academically, but all the other stuff, that, I don't know, there's a term for it, but it's like, what your dad would teach you. I don't know the actual slang for it. I don't remember it at the time.
Street smarts? I don't know.
Yeah, sort of street smarts. We'll say street smarts, right?
Practical skills. I don't know.
Yeah, just practical skills in general. You don't learn the street smarts in school because it's all about book smarts in a way. And I just think school should be a little bit more holistic.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, you brought it up. You can make the argument that is the job of the parents, and we will talk about that in the future. But I think just like as a fail-safe, it's not a bad idea to have it in school.
Yeah, definitely. All right, so we're going to wrap up by talking about, hypothetically, what would you do instead of school? And so we have a couple of options that we're going to talk about. I think one of the primary ones, though, we want to focus on is most likely homeschooling. So, Matt, I'll let you start with some of the pros of homeschooling.
So, a lot of people now have access to this thing called technology and the internet. So, even in high school, I, noticed that a lot of it is going more so to that self-learning, sort of style already. There is a way in which you can make it an alternative to a rigid in-person thing. I mean, you're already seeing it now, despite, whether you want to or not.
Zoom University.
Lots of people are experimenting with this style. Because one of the main problems with school is the fact that you're teaching 100 people at a time, and people learn at different rates. And I think there is a way where you can use technology to have a place where you can learn at your own pace. This idea is, I think, summed up by the term reverse classroom, which I was introduced to at high school. And so the idea with reverse classroom is the normal classroom setting that you go to school and the teacher tells you facts, and then you go home and you practice or study them, and then you come back and you take the test. Reverse classroom, instead, you do the learning at home, and you come to school and you review it, study, practice, talk to your peers in the classroom. And I really like this idea, and I think that it's a way in which you can avoid a lot of the time wasting and you can avoid the feelings of I'm way too behind and I don't know what's going on, and also I'm way too ahead and I'm bored.
Yeah, so I'm going to talk about your first point with technology before I get into reverse classroom. As we live in the 21st century. Obviously, most households at this point in developed countries have the internet. As we've seen in a global pandemic, it's become a very vital aspect in maintaining our rhythm of education while still keeping everybody safe. While it's nice, I do think this last year has only confirmed my initial opinions that I had about online classes and homeschooling in general. I took a couple online courses back in middle school because I was trying to get ahead in math at the time. But the large gist of it essentially is that, school is not just, all right, read a book, take some notes, turn in a test, get a number back, right? School is about, developing sort of interpersonal skills, intrapersonal skills, being able to learn in different environments, right? And so by taking this homeschooling alternative, you have created this concept essentially where you've locked yourself into one mode of learning. And if you enjoy it, that's great, right? But what you're essentially missing out on is your ability to adapt I would say the vast majority of jobs are not online. Maybe the IT sector is booming online, maybe a couple, like customer service, etc. But the vast majority of services are still provided in person. Being able to handle that situation is a vital skill that a lot of people miss out on because they did a homeschooling alternative. Naturally, if it makes sense for you to do homeschooling, I know if you're taking a sabbatical but you want to keep up with your education, then it makes sense for you to take a homeschooling. Likewise, if you can't keep up with regular homeschooling or regular school because you want to work a full-time job, homeschooling sounds like a good alternative for you. But do note the risks that you're taking. And, I don't have any, I wish I had pulled up studies beforehand indicating, effects of online learning, but you are missing out quite a bit. That being said, reverse classroom, I do like the idea of reverse classroom. We used it quite a few times. Me and Matt went to the same high school. What I will say, though, it works better for some subjects than it does other subjects. And what I also noticed is that some students who perhaps had other stuff going on in school at the time were unable to maintain the standard that was expected to them once they fell behind because of the workload that was then placed because, let's say hypothetically you're in a chemistry classroom, right? And in that chemistry classroom, you're given reverse learning notes. All right, learn about molarity. All right, let's say that night you had a Spanish test tomorrow, so you didn't get a chance to do the notes. Next day you come to class. All right, I'm glad you guys learned about molarity. Let's talk about it. And you have not much to contribute to the conversation. Now that there's no lesson being given, essentially the feeling that you will get the entire time is that I have no idea what's going on. I need to read the lesson. I need to read the lesson. I need to read the lesson. And, sometimes it's just unavoidable. You could be like the hardest working person in a classroom and you'll still have an off day. That's just a given fact of life, right?
Just go to the bathroom for half an hour and read the notes.
Well, I mean, if you want to present that as a serious argument, I think that has its own implications. But,
no, I'm joking.
But yeah, essentially, I like it. I do think, students should familiarize themselves. I think part of the reason I was able to do what I was able to do in high school was because I was constantly familiarizing myself ahead of time with lessons, and reverse classroom worked well. But, I think for some subjects, especially like sciences and probably science, it'll exist best within this context of science and maybe science-like subjects. But, for other subjects, maybe like literature, maybe like math, sometimes new concepts are hard to grasp on your own, right? Mm-hmm. And you do need that introduction in a classroom. I know I found this probably, sometimes we would have reverse classroom from math, and it would be hard to take a brand new foreign concept, watch 2 videos on it, and sometimes people would get the gist, sometimes they wouldn't, and a lot of times the teacher would just end up wasting their time by assigning the students homework and then assigning themselves a lesson into the classroom that covered literally what the students were supposed to learn the previous night, and were unable to because of the format it was presented in.
Honestly, I think you got all the points pretty well. I don't really have anything to add.
All right, great. So last thing we're going to talk about really fast, briefly, is, instead of online school, what else could you do instead of high school? And I'll let you go through that.
Yeah, so just kind of brainstorming, what do you do besides traditional school? There is the idea of doing a trade school or a vocational school, and that's more of like what we were talking about before. If you have decided you know what you want to do as a career, then maybe you can get hands-on direct training on that as opposed to having to do school instead. And then in general, maybe like instead of having to sit in a classroom, if there was like a way where you could get more like direct experience or hands-on learning, kind of like the internship sort of idea, but earlier, like an old school,
like an
apprenticeship sort of thing. That maybe that could be like an alternative.
And so, I mean, what this could sort of transition to, and I like the idea is, I know the U.S. doesn't do this system, but for a lot of people who are pursuing further education past their undergrad, like med school, law school, or even like some grad school like programs, right? You have this. I'll talk about med school because that's what I've obviously researched the most into, right? In the U.S., you have this program, and it's similar for law, where you have to do your 4 years of undergrad, and then you have to do your 4 years of med school, and then you have to do whatever else, your residency and fellowship, before you can get your job. A lot of other countries are able to streamline that by simply, putting those students who know that they're going to do med or law, because those sorts of occupations, you have to know basically by the time you're entering college or within your first semester at college, okay, this is the profession I need to pursue, because there's a lot of stuff that needs to be done before you get into them. I know, I'll give you the example of, I know Pakistan uses this 5-year program and substitutes that 11th to 12th grade in for, the undergrad learning, which, as you do through the IB or AP, you often cover, most of the first year course like Common Core courses that you would cover in undergrad, and just offering a solution. Maybe in the US you do 6 years oftentimes, and I know there are programs that exist like this, but it just needs to be standardized.
Yeah, so briefly, one counterpoint I would say to that, and it's sort of like a counterpoint to something that we've been saying a lot, which is if you decide early on what you want to do, then why waste your time with other stuff? Maybe it is too early to decide what you want to do. Like maybe you decide when you go into whatever, like 11th and 12th grade, you decide, I want to do this thing. You do it for 2 years and you realize either you're not very good at it or you don't want to do it. And then you're kind of just, in some scenarios, you would be like stuck having to do this thing for like 4 more years, even if you don't necessarily want to.
Right, and I mean, you could offer a sort of bailout option, but that would be getting into technicalities. Okay, well, thank you guys for listening to episode 1 of season 2. We will be uploading monthly, and stay tuned for next episode about politics in the classroom. Adios!
Yeah, that was good.
You can cut out the adios if you want. I just didn't
no, that's funny.